Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. I'm really glad you're joining me today because, wow, we're tracking a massive, incredibly fast-moving geopolitical crisis unfolding right now in the Middle East. Over just the last 48 hours, the fragile peace that the whole world was basically holding its breath for, it's completely unraveled. Today, we're going to look closely at this July 2026 escalation of US and Iranian military strikes, some stunning declarations from world leaders, and what this all actually means for literally one of the most critical economic choke points on the planet. As we sift through the incoming data, the quotes, and the timeline, we're going to piece together exactly how this all fell apart.
Okay, let's dive into this because it all really starts with this massive breaking statement from US President Donald Trump. He was speaking just ahead of a NATO summit in Turkey, and reporters asked him about the status of the Memorandum of Understanding. Now remember, that's the interim ceasefire agreement signed back on June 17th that was supposed to halt the hostilities from earlier this year. His response? It was incredibly blunt. He said, "To me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them." With just those few words, the diplomatic off-ramp that the global community had really pinned its hopes on was effectively declared dead.
So, that brings us to the absolutely critical question for today. How did this ceasefire collapse so incredibly fast? And what does it actually mean for the rest of the world? If you want to keep tracking this unfolding story with us, make sure to hit that follow, like, and share button. But for now, let's look at the timeline and the massive global economic impact now that the missiles are flying once again.
So what was the immediate trigger for this renewed wave of violence? Well, President Trump took to Truth Social to explain the justification for the latest U.S. military actions. He stated, and I quote, "This is in retribution for yesterday's bombing of ships by Iran. If it happens again, it will get much worse." So the United States launched a fresh wave of strikes for a second day running, and they are squarely tying this military action to the protection of international vessels that had just recently come under fire.
Now, to really understand the military strategy behind this, we've got to look at the official statement from U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM. They noted that these specific strikes were targeted along Iran's southern coast for a very distinct reason, to, as they put it, further degrade their ability to threaten freedom of navigation. These strikes rattled several coastal Iranian cities, actually leaving some areas entirely without power. The U.S. objective here is strictly focused on neutralizing the naval and aerial threats to those vital shipping lanes.
But you can see how quickly this builds into a tit-for-tat escalation, right? On one side of the ledger, you have the U.S. targeting Iranian coastal infrastructure to protect shipping. And on the exact same day, Iran immediately responded not by hitting U.S. soil, but by launching a second day of attacks on neighboring Gulf nations, specifically targeting Kuwait and Bahrain. And why those two nations? Well, because both are home to significant U.S. military bases. Iran's Revolutionary Guards even followed this up by stating their response would extend to other U.S. bases in the region if the American attacks continue.
The regional fallout from this rapid exchange? It's been instantaneous and honestly pretty terrifying for the folks on the ground. Kuwait's defense ministry literally had to activate their air defenses to intercept hostile missiles and drones midair. Over in Bahrain, the Interior Ministry was urging citizens to find safe shelter as air raid sirens were blaring, and alerts briefly sounded in Qatar too. And you know, the human cost is already being tallied. State media in Iran reported that a firefighter was tragically killed following an attack on Iran Shah Airport in the southeast of the country.
This extremely rapid spread of military action across the Gulf brings us to the absolute economic core of this crisis. What does all this mean for the Strait of Hormuz? Before we look at why this specific body of water has the entire global economy on edge, just take a quick second to like and subscribe to the channel if you're finding this explainer helpful.
So, the crucial point is this single number right here, 20%. Roughly 20% of all global oil supplies and 20% of seaborne gas tankers pass through the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, it is literally the lifeblood of global energy. Any disruption here, it doesn't just affect the Middle East. It directly impacts energy prices, inflation, and manufacturing in basically every single country on Earth.
As we know, the Strait is the vital trade artery linking the Gulf to the north with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea to the south. But the massive strategic issue here is that for OPEC countries who are supplying these giant Asian markets, the options to bypass this route using pipelines are incredibly limited. So if this strait closes, the oil simply stops moving. Period. And what's truly staggering when you actually look at the geography is just how vulnerable this choke point is. While the strait is 20 miles wide at its narrowest physical point, the actual navigable shipping lands, the deep water where these massive supertankers can safely travel, are just 2 miles wide in either direction. That is a 2-mile bottleneck for 1/5 of the world's energy, and it's surrounded right now by heavily armed coastal territories actively engaged in military strikes.
And control over this tiny 2-mile lane is exactly what is being contested. We heard President Trump's perspective on protecting the ships, but we also have to look at the Iranian perspective. Iran's top negotiator, Mohammad Bakr Khalibafov, responded very forcefully on social media declaring the Strait of Hormuz will only open with Iranian arrangements, not American threats. It's a clear, definitive statement that Iran fully intends to maintain ultimate management and leverage over this critical waterway, setting the stage for a really dangerous standoff.
So what exactly is happening inside Iran as all these missiles fly? While this giant geopolitical chess match is happening over the waters of the Gulf, we absolutely have to look at the context on the ground inside Iran to understand the sheer intensity of this moment. And hey, if you're finding this structured breakdown helpful, please consider sharing this explainer with a friend. And this brilliantly illustrates why things are so volatile. Looking at the timeline reveals exactly why this collapse is so explosive right now. The war originally began back on February 28th, when Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was killed in the initial U.S.-Israeli strikes. After months of intense fighting, a memorandum of understanding was finally signed on June 17th. But now on July 8th, the ceasefire has completely collapsed. And the critical part? It has collapsed at the exact same moment that the country is holding this massive, deeply emotional funeral for Khamenei.
To really grasp the scale of the domestic atmosphere right now, get this. The governor of Mashhad, which is the city hosting the final burial, estimated that up to 15 million people were expected to attend the ceremonies. 15 million mourners. The atmosphere in the entire country is just highly charged. It's steeped in grief, it's steeped in anger, and it is lacking any sort of political circuit breaker right as the military conflict with the U.S. reignites.
And this wasn't just a single afternoon event either. The burial at the shrine of Imam Reza, which happens to be Iran's most revered place of worship, was the culmination of a marathon multi-day procession. The coffin, which was carried in a refrigerated vehicle, was actually transported through the holy cities of Karbala and Najaf in neighboring Iraq, drawing these massive crowds before finally arriving in northeast Iran. So the domestic pressure and the sheer nationalistic fervor surrounding this event serve as this immense backdrop to the military decisions being made in Tehran today.
So, taking all of this in, the collapsed diplomacy, the strikes on coastal cities and military bases, the severe threats to global shipping, and this massive domestic mourning, where does this fast-moving conflict go from here? Because we are truly entering uncharted waters. And real quick, if you want to stay updated as we navigate these waters, make sure you're following the channel.
Let's quickly summarize the key takeaways we've covered today. First off, the June interim ceasefire, it is effectively over, as definitively declared by the U.S. president. Second, the military posture is entirely retaliatory right now, with the U.S. vowing things will get much worse if shipping attacks continue, and Iran promising to hit even more bases if they are struck again. Third, those neighboring Gulf states are absolutely caught in the crossfire and remain on maximum high military alert. And finally, global energy markets are staring down the barrel of immense pressure, as the 2-mile-wide Strait of Hormuz basically becomes a highly contested war zone.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. With the ceasefire completely shattered, a deeply aggrieved population of millions mourning in the streets, and military strikes literally escalating by the hour, is there any room left for diplomacy to prevent a wider, devastating war over the world's most critical shipping lane? Or have we already crossed the point of no return? Think about that for a bit. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I'll see you in the next one.